Hello everyone, I'm Paul McGuire Grimes. It was inevitable, given the massive success of Scream, that a sequel would be greenlit, shot, and released a year later. Scream 2 hit theaters December 12th, 1997, and obviously came with huge expectations. This is Paul's Trip to the Movies and the third part in my Scream retrospective. As a Scream fan, I was ready to go. I remember plowing through my Entertainment Weekly that featured the women of Scream 2 as the cover story and couldn't wait to feast my eyes on the sequel. Now, by now, my parents did allow me to see it in the theaters, despite the R rating, and I went with my aunt and uncle to the Showplace Theater in Coon Rapids, Minnesota. Now, for the opening sequence, we learn that the Woodsboro murders of the first movie became the subject of a book by Gale Weathers and has now been turned into a movie called Stab with Heather Graham in the Drew Barrymore role of Casey Becker. It's the night of the sneak preview with Jada Pinkett and Omar Epps attending the movie, despite the fact that she'd rather see a Sandra Bullock movie. Now, cosplay has taken over the audience, and we see a variety of ghost-faced costumes in the audience. But what they don't know is that as Stab is playing, a real-life killer is brutally in action, stabbing Pinkett and Epps in plain sight. Cut to the title card, and we find Sidney Prescott attending Windsor College. It's that next morning when she receives word that fellow students were killed. All eyes are on Sidney as the release of Stab seems to have ignited a new round of horrors. Lucky for her, movie-obsessed friend Randy, played by Jamie Kennedy, is also on campus, as well as new bestie Hallie, played by Elise Neal, and boyfriend Derek, played by Jerry O'Connell. The news of the murders attracts journalist Gale Weathers, played by Courtney Cox, and Deputy Dewey, played by David Arquette, and they wonder if they're next. Now, at one point, we get to sit in on one of Randy's classes where the students and the teacher discuss if the killer is trying to create a real-life sequel. This then leads into a discussion of whether sequels are better than the originals, with movies like The Godfather Part 2, Aliens, and House 2, The Second Story getting mentioned. Leave it to Kevin Williamson's script to go deep on the rules of sequels. Check out this scene where Randy provides the rules of sequels to Dewey.
The body count is always bigger. Number 2, the death scenes are always much more elaborate. More blood, more gore. Carnage, candy. Your core audience just expects it. And number 3, if you want your sequel to become a franchise, never, ever...
How do we find the killer, Randy? That's what I want to know.
Oh, let's look at the suspects. There's Derek, the obvious boyfriend. Hello, Billy Loomis. The guy's pre-med in his pity. Me surface wound conveniently missed every major vein and artery.
So you think it's Derek?
Not so fast. Let's assume the killer, or Urs, has a half a brain. He's not a Nick at Night rerun type of guy. He wants to break some new ground, right?
Right.
So forget the boyfriend. It's tired. Who else do we got?
There's...
Mickey, the freaky Tarantino film student. But if he's a suspect, so am I. So let's move on.
Well, let's not move on. Maybe you are a suspect.
Well, if I'm a suspect, you're a suspect.
You have a point. Okay, let's move on.
Now, what makes Scream 2 a worthy sequel is that it not only follows the rules, but it's more than that. The sequel isn't just your standard horror sequel with mindless jump scares and characters that we don't care about, as Williamson had this story planned out when he wrote the first one, as he wrote a story outline for both Scream 2 and Scream 3 at that time. Now, director Wes Craven is also back, and makes every ghost-faced killing really thrilling and sometimes really shocking, as you can tell from the opening sequence. One big scene features Randy, Gale, and Dewey receiving a call from a ghost face, and as Gale and Dewey race around campus to see which students are on their phones, Randy starts mouthing off to Ghostface, and I'm sure you can guess what happens next. The deaths are bigger, bolder, and bloodier than they were in the first film. The audience knows inevitably what's going to happen, and yet Craven keeps us on the edge of our seat, wincing about what's going to come next. Who will meet their fate? Who's the killer or killers? That guessing game is back, and I think Craven and Williamson make it fairly evident who the main killer is, but it was the reveal of the second killer that had me shook. It was a twist that I did not see coming. Scream 2 has a slew of familiar faces, with cameos from Luke Wilson and Tori Spelling, who are appearing in Stab, to Joshua Jackson and Louis Arquette, who is David Arquette's father. Now, you may know Timothy Olyphant from his work on Justified or Deadwood, but it was his big break playing Mickey, the other film-obsessed student, in Scream 2. Now, the best new addition to the cast is Emmy and Tony winner Laurie Metcalf as reporter Debbie Salt. Debbie Salt has a few screws loose, and Metcalf rides that line of camp perfectly while drawing a few laughs as she pisses off Gail Weathers with her incessant questions. Debbie Salt is one of my absolute favorite characters in the whole Scream franchise. Scream 2 was a box office hit, making $172 million worldwide. Critics were quite favorable, giving it an 82% on Rotten Tomatoes. It really bucks the trend that the film makes fun of by being a successful and scary horror sequel. Don't be surprised if you find Scream fans that actually prefer 2 over the first movie. While I tend to repeatedly watch the first movie, I could still quote the second one if need be. Don't forget to check out my reviews of the other Scream movies. Click subscribe on my YouTube channel. This whole franchise is one of my absolute favorites in the whole horror genre next to Halloween. If you're a Scream fan, I'd love to hear from you. Follow me on Instagram and Twitter at Paul's Movie Trip. Let me know some of your favorite characters, some of your favorite movies from the whole Scream franchise. And then go to my website, paulstriptothemovies.com, for even more. Thank you so much for watching my look back at Scream 2. This is Paul's Trip to the Movies.